Glad you're here though, Neff. It's good to see you once again. And yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure. Glad you're here though, Neff. It's good to see you once again. And you bet. Let's see. I just realized I accidentally flipped on the audio so everybody can hear us. That's okay, we're gonna get through this. One sec. I thought I had this figured out, but I think that I just realized I accidentally flipped on the audio so everybody can hear us. That's okay, we're gonna get through this. One sec. So I'm not sure, let's see. Well, we'll start in a second. Thanks for your patience, everybody. We should have sound now. Should have sound now. Let me know if we don't. Sorry about that. We're gonna make it. I promise. So, I'm very excited to let you know that both of the speakers have their sweet links in the description. You can check out their material. Now, we still don't have sound coming through. It's a little bit surprising.
I hope I didn't mess anything up with my technical issues.
No, I think it's maybe that we. How is it? It does hear you, Ryan.
Hello.
Oh, we do have sound now, I think. Let me know, audience, if you can hear me or if it's just Ryan, because I see that it does show the volume picking up for Ryan, but it doesn't show for myself. Ryan, can you ask them if they hear me?
Can you hear James? Let us know if you can hear James or anybody else.
So, I think we're set. Haha, very funny, Agrippa. Okay. Oh man, I'm excited. So basically, we are going to start moving forward. And it sounds, Mark Caesar, thanks for your feedback. He said sound is fine this end, and Patrick Jane, standing for truth. Thanks you guys. Very glad, and thanks Ryan for helping me out there. So here we go. If you are new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button, as we have debates every week, and they are always a blast. I honestly, this is again, in my experience, I feel like this is. Do you guys remember WrestleMania 18, where it was Hulk Hogan versus The Rock, and they said it's wrestling's future versus wrestling's past? We've said that before when we've had Shannon Q on, but I think it's also true with Ryan, because Ryan is even more green in the age sense compared to Shannon, but definitely no less philosophically trained. In fact, I would venture to say Ryan's one of the more philosophically trained people that we've gotten to have on. So this is going to be a lot of fun. You all know Nephilim Free. I'm going to let these guys explain what they've been up to on their channel. But when I do, I just want to quick mention Nephilim Free has been around since 2008. And so the reason that's important is, as you could say, wrestling's past or YouTube's past, and he's still here. Now, a lot of people have given poor Neff a lot of criticism, but you know, he's been around since the days of like Potholer and others. Do you guys remember these like old YouTubers like Potholer and I'm trying to think of who else would have been around at that time? Like Dark Matter's been around for a long time, but Neff's been around as well, and he's still here despite all of the abuse. So we are glad he's here. Moving forward, I would love for you to share, Ryan, what you've been up to at your channel. Which, by the way, everybody, you can find that down in the description. Ryan, thanks for coming on, buddy.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you again for having me again. I don't really make too much stuff. I've just been focused on school. I should be doing homework right now, probably. But yeah, so just follow me on Twitter if you want, you know, just interesting religious stuff and weird posts. So don't really do much.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you very much, Ryan. And you can check out his link in the description. Neff, glad to have you here as well. What have you been up to at your channel? And thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. I love these kinds of discussions. It's really exciting and enjoyable for me. I do what I've always been doing, Christian apologetics in general, especially relating to creation and evolution. I, as of late, been doing a lot to refuting arguments made by atheists and agnostics, mostly atheists. So it's something, I think these are really important subjects, and I really love digging into them. And I'm looking forward to talking with Josh this evening. I mean, Ryan, I'm sorry,
Right.
excuse me.
Brad, well, we're glad you're both here. And trying to think of, oh, that's right. We have coming up very soon, we're very excited about this. Oh no, hold on a second. Don't look at that. Forgive me, we're going to change this really quick. We basically have a debate coming up between our good friend Tom Jump and Inspiring Philosophy. The reason that I freaked out right there is because I just realized I have the date wrong on that banner. But to make it clear, because I screwed it up yesterday and I'm fixing it right now. Mike from Inspiring Philosophy is like, hey, what date is it? Because he saw me screw up. So don't worry, though. Mike's been extremely gracious, extremely kind to the channel. And here comes the new correct date. So Wednesday, February 27th. That's next week already. We will host Inspiring Philosophy versus Tom Jump, two very formidable debaters. So it's funny that everybody knows who Inspiring Philosophy is. He's been around for a long time, and he's a skilled debater, to be sure. I mean, I highly encourage you to check out, for example, his debate against Matt Dillahunty on Non Sequitur Show. Also, though, Tom Jump all of a sudden just kind of came out of nowhere and is like, whoa, Tom Jump has been reading a ton of philosophy, and he's very sharp. He's very on his feet. He's just a really good debater. It was like, wait, where did this guy come from? So it's going to be a heck of a debate. Okay, won't take any more time. The speakers, given that Neph is taking the affirmative that God does exist, we will let Neph kick off the discussion. And so just for a couple of minutes, Neph, if you want to share why you think there is a God that exists, and this is just informal discussion, so maybe a minute or two you want to share, and then...
Okay.
You bet. So the floor is yours, guys. Thanks for coming on.
Okay. Great. Well, I think all of our reality is explained by the existence of God. I think everything is evidence for the existence of God. I think Christianity has the greatest explanatory power of any theological idea, if you want to call it an idea. And I see atheism as having no explanatory power. Atheism seems to me incapable of explaining anything. The existence of the universe, the complexity and interdependence of organic life, the existence of the human mind. It's incapable of explaining the astonishing properties of Scripture, whereby they prove themselves to be the inspired Word of God. I think evidences for the existence of God can be found in virtually everything. And I think that if somebody studies the Scriptures, the Hebrew Scriptures, the New and Old Testament combined, one would find objective reason to believe that Jesus Christ is, in fact, God manifest in the flesh. And I think the argument for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is very powerful. But I think the most objective evidence that the Bible is, in fact, God's inspired word, and therefore God does exist, is in fulfilled prophecy. I like Dr. Dan Olinger, believe that the prophecy, fulfilled prophecy, is an objective demonstration that the Scriptures are, in fact, the inspired word of God, because they demonstrate that the one who inspired those words for man to pen has knowledge of the entire history of the world beforehand, and is able to tell us over and over with complete accuracy of events that will take place one century after another, and link them together so that we can look back at what was said before and find that it actually came true in history. And secular archaeologists and historians have verified many of the events spoken of in Scripture, prophesied to take place, have actually taken place. And so it's not just the Bible testifying of itself, So anyway, those are, I believe, in general, I just believe that Christianity has the greatest explanatory power, and therefore Christian theology is the truth.
Okay. I would ask first, what do you think Christianity? I guess we'd go straight to the prophecy thing. So do you have some examples of a fulfilled prophecy that isn't the Bible affirming itself? So like that rules out the possibility that the authors simply wrote in, knowing what was prophesied earlier, they were able to write in the answers to those.
Yeah, sure. Here's a couple that come to mind. The prophecy of, let's say, for example, of, the city of Tyre, for example. Atheists are ones that point to that prophecy as a supposed failed prophecy, but the evidence says quite the opposite. The Scriptures say that Tyre, which existed in two parts. One was the land portion of the city, and then there was an island about a mile off coast that was the second part of that same city in a fortified part of it that existed on an island. And the scriptures say that the city would be scraped clean like a bedrock, and a place for fishermen to cast their nets and dry their nets. And we find that that is precisely what happened. Secular history verifies that Alexander the Great did that very thing. He had ordered his army to literally remove every board, every brick, every stone from the land portion of the city of Tyre and cast it into the ocean to build a causeway by which his soldiers could march across to get to the land, the island portion of the city. And that causeway is still there today. It's been buried by sand since then. And the entire city of Tyre was, in fact, removed. This is what secular history shows. That is exactly what Alexander the Great did. He literally scraped the city clean to throw every bit of it into the sea as a causeway. Aerial photographs of Tyre from the early 20th century, 1920s, 30s, and modern ones show that the sea has engulfed that land portion of the city of Tyre, buried it, in fact, in thousands of tons of sand. And the city, the prophecy also states that the city of Tyre would be flooded, that it would be sunken into the sea. It would be washed over by the ocean. And so the evidence is clear from the existence of the sand covering the land portion of Tyre that it has at one point in the last 2,000 years for sure, been actually buried by the sea, and sand was deposited by the ocean in tremendous amounts. So we have the fulfillment of the prophecy in at least two parts. There's actually more to it, that the city would be completely inundated by water, then buried by the sea, and that it would be scraped clean. And those two things have taken place. We have the physical geological evidence for the city having been engulfed by the ocean, and we have the historical evidence that Alexander literally scraped the city clean. The land portion of the city, removed every bit of it to build a causeway. So that's a fulfilled prophecy. I think that goes beyond human guesswork. I think that's one of the interesting things. Let me give you one quote, and then I'll give the mic to you, from Dr. Dan Olinger, from his talk, Are These the Right Words? Dan Olinger is a PhD theological seminary graduate. He says, fulfilled prophecy is an objective demonstration that Scripture has a supernatural source. These prophecies are so accurate that even unbelievers, even what we would call today liberal scholars, don't dispute that the prophecies are accurate. They have to hold to the fact that the prophecies were written after the fact because that's how accurate they are. And they have no other evidence than simply that the accuracy of the prophecy exists. And that couldn't have been done because supernatural things don't happen. By the way, there are a number of terms you could apply to this way of thinking, but science is not one of them. So, and then one more brief quotation, if you don't mind. This is from Dr. Dan Walker. Thomas Ross, Baptist Seminary professor, University of Wisconsin, says this. In Daniel chapter 11 alone, there are approximately 135 prophetic statements predicting the future in astounding detail, and every single one fulfilled and historically confirmed. And one more thing he says, the Bible contains predictions.
Really quick.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
You're passing it over to me.
Yeah, no, I'm done.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm no expert in biblical prophecy. So it's hard for me to say much to that. I would have to research into, the exact verses, and I'm kind of curious about, because he said that the Tyre example, the city of Tyre, right? It was it only the island portion that sunk? Like it was kind of detached from the city and was kind of...
No, it was the land portion that was swallowed by the sea, not the island portion of it.
But it was split into two different kind of land bodies.
It always existed as two parts. They built the city of Tyre in two parts. They built it on land, but then they inhabited the island and made a fortress, a sea fortress out of it.
Okay, yeah. And so I don't know. I can't say much to it. I'm sorry, I might not be a good debate partner in that aspect. But I'm just kind of skeptical of all the different ways there could be something going on there. So in terms of defining the limits of the city, for example, trusting the record of history. And so was it confirmed that all this happened beyond or way after the prophecy, right? Like,
I don't know how many years. I think it's probably at least a couple of centuries.
And would it also be possible, I'm not saying this is the case, but would it be possible that somebody could have revised scripture as well to include that event? So like saying that they prophesied, is that a possibility?
I don't see how that would be rational to conclude that that would be what has taken place. I wonder if I can screen share something with you real
Yeah,
brief.
that'd be good.
Give me
Let
one
me
sec.
see if that, tell me if it works. Are you seeing what I'm showing on the screen?
Yep.
Let's
Yeah?
see. One
I
Okay.
sec.
am.
The audience will in a sec, but don't worry.
Okay.
You can, keep going.
Okay, but Ryan, you can see it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is an aerial photograph of Tyre from the 1930s. And you can see that that there's the island out there in the left there, and the land portion of Tyre, and then you see all this sand and that actually extends and now has bridged the distance between the land portion and the island portion, and it's just millions of tons probably of sand, and that sand wouldn't be there if that land hadn't been engulfed by the ocean. The waters of the sea is what brought the sand there. Now this is a modern photograph of the city of Tyre today.
Okay.
And you see, they have rebuilt a new city, not the original. That culture is gone for good. God's word said that city would be destroyed, and it was. In ancient times, when they said the city of something, they weren't necessarily referring to the buildings and the streets. They meant the culture, the government, that civilization, right? And so
Yeah.
the scripture says Tyre, meaning that culture, that military prowess, that merchant marine, that culture there would be destroyed and never return. And that has held true. There's a new culture of new people there, and it's not the same one that existed. That one is gone for history forever. But that's the difference. That's the now in ancient times, Tyre had there was no sand between the two. So that sand has been. Let me screen share now if I can. Stop screen sharing that. Oh my, how do I do that? Got myself into a problem now. How do I stop screen sharing?
Oh, if you go to
Okay,
the
there it is. I see it. There we go.
Cool.
So that sand was dumped there by the sea because it couldn't have gotten there by the wind. That's irrational. So prophecy fulfilled.
Yeah. So let me know what you think about this. In the example of basically, could I say about any culture, any city, I could say in the future at some point this culture will be transformed or destroyed, or this city will be destroyed, and that would hold true, right? There's no kind of eternal culture or eternal city in the sense that everything will be destroyed eventually.
I guess you can say all cultures, come and go eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that doesn't explain the city being scraped clean by Alexander's army and every bit of it thrown into a sea to make a causeway. And the causeway is still there. They built up the causeway is actually the basis for this, where the sand built up around it between the land and the island portion of it. But early 1930s photographs, because the sand was not there. And there was just a causeway under the sea. You could see it it was no more than 20, maybe 15, 20, 30 feet under the sea. You could actually see it in the aerial photograph. But so that wouldn't explain, that, okay, I can see the culture is going to disappear eventually, maybe. But that wouldn't explain the city being swallowed by the sea and the entire land portion being scraped clean like a bedrock, which is what Alexander the Great's army did, according to secular historians.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not too versed in the topic, so I can't really say much more. It sounds convincing, but I'm also wondering if there's some kind of motivated reasoning behind it. I'm not saying, so don't even take this as a criticism against the argument, because I recognize that I'm incapable. But coming from a position of kind of atheism or agnosticism, I'm wondering if people in other traditions or other religions might find a way to piece things together like that. So, so I just don't know.
Well, I would refer to the statement by Dr. Thomas Ross that I mentioned a minute ago, except this one he says, a person who is intellectually honest and who does not have a priori bias, hatred, or unwillingness to submit to the God of the Bible will be driven to recognize that the Bible is what it claims, the living Word of God. He says also, the Bible contains predictions about the future that go beyond what is reasonably possible by human guesswork, validating the Bible's claim that it's not merely a human book, but the very revelation of God, the creator of the universe. So that's an interesting statement to go beyond what's reasonably possible by human guesswork. So would it be reasonably possible, to guess that Tyre is going to be swallowed by the sea and the land portion of it literally scraped completely clean, every building, every bit of it just scraped completely off, and the whole city completely disappear and thrown into the sea? I don't think that's myself. I don't see that as reasonable guesswork that people could just, oh, I bet that's going to happen. That just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
How about this is definitely interesting, and not to be dismissive at all, but given that both of you have more familiar stomping ground in philosophy, maybe some of the philosophical arguments that might be more familiar to Ryan. Like, I'm kind of curious on what each of you would say are your favorite philosophical arguments for or against God's existence.
Okay. Do you want to take? Yeah, because I'm pretty ahistorical, so I'm fairly detached from a sense that I can trust history. I kind of view history as something that we construct, and so knowing that, I kind of have this inherent skepticism, and I haven't really explored it too deeply. So, do you have kind of a more philosophical, abstract? I know it's kind of silly, but.
Well, atheism is a materialistic worldview. It posits that material causes, matter in motion, explains all phenomena. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm glad to hear you acknowledge that by saying, yeah, that's right, because you wouldn't believe how many atheists I've debated that said, no, that's not true. Because and that's actually, in my opinion, to deny their own worldview. Of course it's true. So I don't see, here's the interesting thing. Human minds produce immaterial abstract constructs like information, algorithms, linguistics, things that exist and are real. We employ them all the time. You and I are doing it with every word that comes out of our mouths, right? We're manufacturing non-physical fundamental realities, information, algorithms, linguistics, symbolism. All languages depend upon symbols, application of meaning to a matter with a symbol, or interpretation of meaning from a symbol is a mental process, not a material one, right? So I don't see that atheism is able to account for non-physical fundamental realities like linguistics, algorithms, information, aboutness, the observation of the passing of time. Here's one to think about. All chemical interactions take place in the now, in the present. They don't take place in the past or the future. They will take place in the future. There are those that have taken place in the past, but all chemical interactions are taking place currently in the present. So how in the world then, if human beings don't have a non-physical component like a Christian would call a spirit, how is it that we're capable of considering the future and deciding, which brand of mayonnaise we need to buy when we go to Walmart tomorrow? Because if our thoughts and emotions are merely chemical interactions in the brain taking place in the present, then to me, it doesn't seem rational that human beings would have a sense of the future or be able to consider the future if all our thoughts are being produced by chemical interactions taking place in the present. See, these kinds of things to me make atheism implausible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of view. So we have particles and chemical reactions and everything, but there's also kind of the side to them that they participate in a certain kind of order, right? They interact in predictable ways, and there's kind of different categories of particles that we can discern and see how they interact with each other. So I think there's something a little bit more. Yes, it's all particles, but these particles actually behave according to certain rules, which some kind of ordering principle, like the logos in the Christian tradition or the Greek, and so with the whole being able to perceive the future or construct possible futures, I was just reading in my psychology textbook. The way they see it, it's kind of the mind is kind of like a machine, and they describe learning as kind of a conditioning process. So we've developed these sense organs, right, like the eyes, all the different senses, and through the interaction of those senses with the material world of the environment, information about that environment is kind of impressed in the mind via the neurons, and things are associated with each other, and that's kind of how the learning process happens. And then through what we've seen and what we've gathered about the world, then the mind constructs possible futures and tries to navigate the world towards those. So I think, we could say we could construct some kind of elaborate machine, right, that has many different functions, but it's still material. So it's mechanical, but it can still operate through the world. A computer is kind of an example of that. So it's like, would you say that the internet exists in some way independent from its physical substrate and it's everything that produced it? Does the internet or this screen right here exist separately from everything that has produced it?
I don't think so. It seems to me it's just a purely electromechanical thing. I don't see that it exists independently. It's not the concept of the internet maybe, but the internet itself doesn't, in my mind. But when it comes to I can see a purely chemical brain. Let's imagine that it's possible that a human brain and intelligence could be produced simply by chemistry in a physical gray matter. So I could see maybe it'd be plausible to say, well, we could turn that into a recording device to record what's taking place, what has taken place. But since chemical interactions take place only in the present, I don't see how it's plausible to believe that it'd be capable of considering a future, only recording what's happening now or what's already taken place. Aboutness is another. My mind can be about the tree in my backyard, but my brain has never contacted that tree. It doesn't have a clue that's even there. Not the physical matter of my brain. So where's the understanding, the knowledge that I can think about something external to my brain if my thoughts and emotions are just chemistry inside my brain, my physical brain? It seems to me logical only that my brain, if it were actually capable of being sentient in its own right, could only consider something if it was able to interact chemically with it, since chemicals is what produces thought. So unless I cut my skull cap off and leaned over and smashed my brain against the tree, it seems implausible to me that my thoughts could be about the tree if my thoughts are produced by nothing but chemistry. These kinds of things to me make atheism seem incapable of having explanatory power for human sentience. And there's a lot more I could talk about, but except maybe the visual binding problem, neural binding problem. Modern neuroscientists have discovered that there is no place in our brain which actually packages our input from our olfactory and our visual and everything to create a visual movie, to create a subjective experience that we live through. There's no there's a mic input, and there's a skin sensory input, and there's a visual input. We've got cameras plugged in, but there's no computer there. There's no part in the brain that says takes the audio, takes the video, takes the tactile, takes and these senses, and that sense of smell and sense of taste and olfactory, and puts them together into a subjective experience. So that seems to me to tell us that subjective experience is not produced by the physical brain, but by something else that's housed in us, that we possess something more and above and beyond our chemistry that's causing our sentience.
Well, I think just because we can't necessarily compartmentalize the brain to that specific degree, to say where exactly, I still think there's, like, isn't your occipital lobe on the back of your head where all of your visual processing takes place? I'm pretty sure they know that.
Yeah, like they know that. That's true.
If you sustain damage to the occipital lobe, you can no longer see, or you can no longer discern images in the same way that you could before.
Well, that's true, but that's just for the visual part of the brain or the audio part of the brain. Or, for example, the neural binding problem states this in the Journal of Cognitive Neurodynamics, 2013. They state this, titled "The Neural Binding Problems They state, we know that there is no place in the brain where there could be a direct neural encoding of this subjective experience, and they cite the work of Coase and Collins, 2003. That is, enough is known about the structure and function of the visual system to rule out any detailed neural representation that embodies the subjective experience. And they also state, neural realization of visual binding is completely unsolved, but not unsolvable. Of course, they're always going to have their faith statements, because variable binding is characteristic of language and abstract reasoning, et cetera, et cetera. So at least they acknowledge it's not solved. You know, they don't know how we get a subjective experience out of a physical brain. And they state also, there is now overwhelming biological and behavioral evidence that the brain contains no stable, high-resolution, full-field representation of a visual scene, even though that is what we subjectively experience. The structure of the primary visual system has been mapped in detail, and there is no area that could encode this detailed information. The subjective experience is thus inconsistent with neural circuitry. So, modern science has not found a way for a human being to have sentience because we have a brain. I think that's a remarkable thing. And as a Christian, I find that supports my worldview, because I believe we have a soul, we have a spirit. We're not just matter in motion.
Yeah, I think they just call it phenomenology, or like
epiphenomenalism.
Yeah. And so I'm still not really too sure what you mean by there needs to be another section that kind of ties together the information. Why can't it just be the occipital lobe receives? And because I'm pretty sure, like, even if you're dreaming and you're producing images, it's still showing up there, right? Like, there's still, let's see. So in the same way that the internet is kind of a composite of all these different information kind of speaking back and forth with itself and ordered in a certain way to produce this experience, that's kind of how I understand the mind.
Well, look at it like this. Let's imagine we have a computer and we can plug in a microphone, and we can plug in a camera, we can plug in other devices, peripherals that put in different inputs. But if there's no CPU in there, there's no subjective. It's not being packaged into a Windows media file. You see what I mean? It's not. There's nothing in the human brain. They're saying there's no CPU that does this. There's no. You know, you can have the auditory part of the brain processing audible signals, and the visual part doing the visual, and it's that olfactory doing the olfactory, but that's as far as it goes. They're saying they don't go to a central location where they're all experienced at the same time. So that's just kind of weird. It doesn't really match the idea of us having an experience where we experience all the senses constantly at the same time. I think that's explainable by the existence of the spirit, though, because I think we're far more than just matter and motion.
What if we just consider the brain as the CPU? So it is that kind of comprehensive whole to which everything is connected. Like, can we do that? Or
well, that's the only way you're left with being able to look at it. You know, that's right.
Yeah, because I don't know. I'm just not sure if there needs to be some kind of center to which these brain parts are connected. Like, I think the brain is just it. Like, it's the CPU.
Well, I mean, why aren't we having six different subjective experiences at the same time instead of experiencing them as one? You see, that's the problem.
Well, I think
we're not six-minded; we're one-minded, experiencing all of our senses together.
It is a strange part of us that like we're constantly, there's some kind of value structure prior to experience that's deciding what experience to make conscious. So like I'm technically receiving all sorts of sensory information, but my mind makes conscious only bits and pieces that fit my goals. So for example, technically I'm receiving information about how warm the room is, maybe like my posture, or how like my back against the chair. Technically my body is still receiving that, my mind is still receiving it, but some kind of value structure is leading me to ignore those and simply focus on what I'm hearing so that I can engage in this conversation. So that's kind of how, so it's not like and I know people with autism have this problem where that structure isn't functioning properly, and then there's just an overstimulation. It is all those different senses, and it's not discerned in a meaningful way. So I think, yeah, there's got to be some way, some component of us that's discerning. So is that what you would call the soul then?
That's how I see it. But I think it goes deeper than that. Consider this thought: if atheistic materialism were true, then immaterial things like propositions, such as the proposition that materialism is true, can't be true. Therefore, atheism is incoherent, self-refuting. If atheistic naturalism were true, then the atheist proposition, there is no evidence for the existence of God or insufficient evidence for the existence of God, is merely a chemical interaction. It's neither true nor false. See, so I don't think atheism has explanatory power for our reality. I think we have to be something above and beyond chemistry and motion in order to explain sentience and free will and the existence of the immaterial abstractions that humans are able to create. So, if all your thoughts and feelings are nothing but chemical reactions taking place in your brain, if that's what they are, regardless of what you think that's capable of doing, then your thoughts are just chemical determinacy. And every thought you have now is produced by an unfathomably long prior chain of chemical interactions that ultimately led you to have the thought that you're having right this moment, right? So,
Yeah.
all right, so then there's no free will. And if there's no free will, there's no opinions. And so everything you say in this hangout with me tonight can't be considered either true or false. It's just a product of chemistry. There's no truth to it or falsity to it. It's just chemistry. And see, that's the problem we run into with atheistic explanations for the existence of the human mind. Things like that.
I don't understand. So like you keep reducing it to it's just chemistry. Like imagine if I had a car, right, and it's doing its work, it's driving me back and forth, and then I try to reduce that to it's just machinery, like it's just particles in a certain order, but it's still performing a certain function given the order of the whole thing of it. So I don't know how reducing it to it's just chemistry really does anything justice, and how it really refutes the subjective experience and the way the mind seems to work. So I don't know how that. I'm with you with the free will though. Like it's been something it was pretty difficult for me to grapple with, and I've kind of just accepted the possibility that it's all determined, which is kind of where you do have to go in some ways with naturalism. But even then again, we could imagine a machine that is programmed to interact with its environment in certain ways, and subjectively for that machine, it doesn't necessarily anticipate what's going to happen in its environment. So there's this kind of illusion of free will that's created of, this program runs when I see a cheeseburger, or this program runs when I see a bear chasing after me. And so there's this sense of choice and sense of free will going on there, but because of how complex everything is, I don't know. I'm kind of with you though that it is determined, but I can't imagine a machine, a determined machine that produces an illusion of free will, a sense of choice. So,
well, I don't really think it's that hard. I think it does stand to reason that, well, for example, is there anything true or false about chemical interactions? They simply are. That's all there is to it. This atom is what it is, and it has this number of electrons orbiting a proton nucleus. And this atom over here, now it simply is what it is. It has X number of electrons around its particular proton nucleus. And if the two encounter each other, they may share or steal electrons from each other, but there's no truth or falsity to that. It's just what is. It's just what happens. It's not. I don't see how you can get a truth statement out of chemistry. Like, is it true that love is a good thing? From chemistry, or is it true that it's wrong to tell a lie? What is a lie if chemistry is all that we are anyway? What is a lie? Is an untruth. So something that is not true. I don't see how we can derive those things from purely from chemistry, and it even melts over into morality. For example, if a human being is, atheists sometimes tell me that I can ask them, they'll say, well, there's no objective moral values and duties. It's all subjective. And I'll say, well, then killing you is not objectively true or not. It's relative. And they'll say, yes, of course. Well, then what causes it to be immoral or wrong in some way for me to kill you? And they'll say, well, because it violates my they can't say free will because atheism is chemical determinacy, but they'll say, well, because my desire to not be harmed, you're violating my desire not to be harmed. Well, this is really a way of special pleading for a human being. Is it immoral to burn a door? That all you're doing is disassembling arranged matter. What about a tree? Is there a moral issue to burning down a tree? If a human being is nothing more than interaction, extremely complex arrangement of matter that is interactive, why is it? How could it be a moral thing to cease the interaction of matter? If that's all you are, there would be no moral issue to it whatsoever. I see a moral issue to it if you have a non-physical image created in the likeness of God, a soul that's not that is the seat and the epitome of everything that a human being is. But if you're just a bag of matter, what could be immoral about ceasing the interactions of a bag of matter? So what could make murder immoral if atheism were true? See, I can find no reason to believe it.
I still have a lot of problems with your attempt to reduce the complex, our complex makeup and the makeup of our mind, by simply saying, oh, it's composed of these parts, and then just saying, oh, because of that, we can't have anything else. But I still think it's the same. It'd be like saying to this computer, oh, it can't possibly run these programs because it's just machine, like it's just particles and matter. Like there's something real about the order that it all takes to produce these different systems. And so I still kind of have problems with that, the reductionism there. I don't think it really works. But
well, is it immoral to destroy a tree? Just not. Let's imagine you own the property. Let's remove all potential, complaints somebody could have against it. Like, well, the tree's part of culture. It belongs to the city. You own the tree. It's the only tree. You own a piece of desert, and there's a tree on it. You own it. You have a right to do with it what you want to. Is it a moral issue to destroy the tree? I don't think that's a moral issue. It's just chemistry. All you're doing is disordering molecules, right? Now, if a human being is just like a tree in a way, that they're nothing more than the ordering of matter and that it's complexly arranged and interactive, how could it be less moral, any more a moral issue to disassemble a human body than to disorder a tree? Where comes this idea that it becomes a moral issue if it's merely chemical? That's the problem that atheism has.
I think the essential difference between a tree and a human being is that can you guys hear me okay? It said my connection was unstable.
No, I hear you fine.
Okay. But there's an essential kind of difference. I mean, I'm kind of on the train of it's all one kind of flux of particles and all that, but there seems to be a pretty clear difference between a human and a tree in that the human is capable of suffering, and is capable of deciding or capable of moving in the world. And so I think it all kind of stems from that. It's like, am I going to participate or am I going to create a society which is unsustainable for me and others in it? That's like the basis of law, the basis of morality. It's like, what kind of game can we create that is sustainable across time, that fulfills as many people's needs as possible and tries to reconcile them all? So I still think we're going to be stuck on this issue of the reductionism, like, oh, it's just matter or it's just particles. There's still something about the form that the particles are taking that kind of matters. So
I don't think it can be reduced to the form of the matter. I don't believe, for example, a tree suffers if you burn it. It simply ceases to exist. I think suffering is something only a spirit can do. Living things suffer. A rabbit would suffer if you threw it in a fire because it has the breath of life in it. that God gave a
Mhm.
rabbit. The human being has a spirit, and so things with spirits suffer. It's spirits that suffer, not flesh. If you take a human being that is vegetable, and let's say their brain is literally dead, they're just a bag of matter now that is interacting, and because there is no cognition going on in this body anymore. They're being fed they're being fed with a tube, and their brain is literally dead. They're just keeping the heartbeat going and the respiration. Would they feel pain if you threw it into a fire? And my personal opinion is it wouldn't experience any pain. You would have electrical signals going to a brain that, and that's it. Just like you would have a reaction in a Venus flytrap. If you stuck a pencil inside and tickled the thing, it would react by snapping shut. That's just chemistry. But there's no suffering going on if there's not a spirit there. That's my opinion. That's my view as a theist. I don't think suffering can be had by matter in any way. But I know that you're stuck with believing somehow there is suffering. Matter can suffer. I don't personally see that as plausible. This
But
is where two of us are going to disagree, I guess.
yeah, I'm just convinced that we can, or that it is very well possible that what you refer to as spirit is this emergent phenomenon of matter that's creating this subjective experience. So, um, you know, and so I think there's something kind of essential about the human condition that creates the possibility for suffering, the possibility for happiness. So I'm not too like I don't agree with that reductionism. Like I don't think you can just continue to say it's just matter, it's just chemicals, because there's something about the way the chemicals are.
Well, I think it's kind of ad hoc to say it's something about the chemicals. You're not able to explain it, that's for sure. And you're kind of stuck with believing that it is the chemicals, but you really can't explain to me how you know that. That's the thing. Let me give you a quote from Dr. Michael Egner, award-winning neurosurgeon. He says this: "The mind, if the mind is entirely caused by matter, free will cannot exist. Matter is governed by fixed laws, and if our thoughts are entirely a product of brain chemistry, then our thoughts are determined by chemistry. Uh, but chemistry doesn't have truth or falsehood, or any other values for that matter. It just is. Enzymatic catalyst isn't true or false, it just is. In fact, the view that the materialism is true is meaningless if materialism is true. If materialism is true, then the thought materialism is true is just a chemical reaction, neither true nor false. While there are some philosophers who assert that free will can exist in a determinist materialistic world, and they're called compatibilists, and some have argued that quantum indeterminacy may leave the room for free will. The most parsimonious explanation for free will is that there is an immaterial component of the mind that is undetermined by matter. I would have to agree with him. Excuse me. So, all I can say is my explanation of it is going to be that we have a non-physical component. That's why humans are able to create non-physical entities like algorithms and information, things that really do exist, but have no mass. They're not tangible, they're not comprised of, nor are they a property of matter, like information or an algorithm. An algorithm is a procedure prescribed by an intelligence, a mathematical equation, for example, on how to compare information and determine what works to be done based on the outcome of that comparison, right? But algorithms don't have any mass. You can't put a measuring tape to an algorithm and say the algorithm is 3 inches long or 3 meters long. That's a nonsensical thing to do. You can't weigh an algorithm either. You can't say this algorithm weighs 12 grams because it has no weight. It doesn't physically exist. It's real. You can transcribe it on the paper, run it to a compact disk where I can describe it and speak it to you, but you can't put it in a mayonnaise jar and say, see the algorithm. It doesn't physically exist at all. And yet it's absolutely real, and we employ them all the time. So I don't know how materialism, atheist materialism, can explain the non-physical abstract constructs of mind, unless human beings have a non-physical component that creates non-physical things. Physical things create physical results. You hit the pool cue, it hits the other balls. There's a physical result from the physical cause. But seems to me logical that if you're going to produce something that's non-physical, doesn't physically exist at all, but it's absolutely real, you need a non-physical component to explain that. How would you address that?
It's just a matter of the systems of our mind. So like, let's say that I created, like, is it any different than if I say I created a machine and it is capable of creating abstract models of its environment? So based on the information that it receives, it's able to construct a map of those bits of information in relationship to each other. So like spatial recognition. So it's like create this little robot that can go into a room, use its sensory detector to gauge everything, like the distance between things, and then can construct, kind of remember and meaningfully construct a representation of that in their head. And you've said multiple times that abstraction is a construction of mind. And so I'm just not convinced that, given that the chemical material substrate can construct those things, that those things necessarily exist apart from the mind in any way. Like they exist as representations of what we've encountered and how we've meaningfully organized them. So I just don't see how that means that the robot has a soul, or that the forms that it created are essentially existent separate from the material substrate that it was engaging with.
Well, I mentioned the neural binding problem, where neuroscientists have determined there is no part of the human brain that produces a visual representation of what we're seeing. In other words, there's no movie house in the brain where the image of what you're seeing with your eyes is reproduced, as you just posited, that there is a representation going on of everything inside our brain. Modern neuroscience has determined that's not so. There isn't a visual reproduction. There's not a screen projector inside our mind, so to speak, a chemical one, that's reproducing, with patterns of electricity, the vision, the images that we see. And as our vision changes, those patterns change to represent exactly what's being the light coming into our eyes. There's no CCD in our brain. That's the point.
I hate to interrupt you. Sorry, Neff. I think for me as well, and then maybe one or two people in the audience, if you're able to like tie this, like anchor this back, kind of, you could say, do a reverse chain of reasoning to show like how this gives evidence leaning toward or away from God. Sorry, it's so, we've gone so deep that for the audience, the big picture might be helpful too, just as a reminder.
Yeah, no. Good point.
So did you want to try to tie that back? So you're saying, like, if it seems that we can't explain how we're able to construct subjective experience via particles and matter and the relationship between chemicals, and given that we can't account for how that happens, like the existence of mind, then it must exist separate from that material substrate. And because something exists independent of that, it's best explained with the Christian tradition. So I'm interested, do you think that other traditions could use this to argue for their God? Do you think that they would be able to use the same line of reasoning to say, well, my tradition mentions a spirit or some kind of abstract being apart from material reality, so that proves that my tradition is true?
Well, that's a good question. I think all theists come to the same reality, the truth that the human being is created in the image of God. We have these abilities, and we have subjective experience, we have morality, we have these things. We're able to produce non-physical components because we have a non-physical component created by another, which has a cause. Our spirit has a cause, and that cause is God. Now, then that comes down to, well, how do you know your God is the real one? And they're not believing in the real one and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, I think then that's a separate argument, and I think that if we examine various religions of the world, we can see that the Christian God is the only plausible God. I can give you an argument for that. I believe that Hindu people that dance around with their eyes rolling out of their heads and their tongues flicking around in the air, just like African people and Native American people, are actually experiencing something spiritual when they do these rituals. I believe
Mhm.
they're in contact with actual spirit entities. I don't think they're God. That's the thing. I think they've fallen away from the one true God, and they're experiencing what I would call a demon. I know that sounds pretty bogus to you, but um, I think there is more. There are more sentient spirit and entities exist besides God. According to the scriptures, God has created innumerable ones, and the third of them abdicated from the holy realm with Satan, according to the scriptures. So there was a big leaving of the oikoterions in the Greek at Natavet. So I believe they're all coming to a certain truth, and that is that there is a God and human beings have a spirit. But I think their understanding of who God is the problem. They don't know the one God that exists, and they're encountering entities that are not God, and so that's why they actually have a spiritual encounter.
And so, what would you say to somebody from the Hindu tradition, or another tradition, who is saying the same thing about the Christian God? So they're saying, oh, when Christians are in their churches praying, they're really praying to the wrong gods or the wrong. It's the same kind of attitude of I have the right system that describes an unseen reality. So how can we empirically verify which is true? So you can see how the same kind of stance would be taken by each tradition. So it'd be like, oh, they're actually worshiping the devil or his demons, and I am worshiping, So I could see how this perspective kind of applies to every tradition in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I see what you're saying. Um, I would point this out about religions. Um, when people encounter Jesus Christ, there seems to be a common thread to their experience, and that is that they become they become repentant in their heart for the wrong they've done. They get an understanding that God is absolutely maximal being and perfectly holy, and they are absolutely in, infinitely inferior to Him, and they have violated His law and offended His holy, perfect character. This is a common. In fact, it is the Christian experience. I don't think that people of other religions experience that the way that Christians do, at least. Imagine, take Hinduism, for example. It's a multifaceted religion. There's different sects of it, and they have different varying beliefs. But one thing they invariable belief is that there are numerous gods. And just like many religions and mythologies of the past, the Greeks had their pantheon, Egyptians, Babylonians, Akkadians, etc., had their own pantheons, and they're abundant, right, in the past. So, but do these gods impress upon those Hindu people that they're a sinner before a single holy God who is the author of all things, and that they've offended Him, and they need to get on their knees and ask Him, "Forgive me. I want your love, not your wrath." And I don't think they have that experience. And so I think logic dictates by itself that they're not encountering the one true God. And it doesn't jive with the Christian experience, which is universal, that Christians have encountered God and God has revealed to them not only His tremendous love, but the fact that He is an absolutely maximal being, and they have offended Him with their infinite inferiority. And that's the Christian experience. And there's a lot of truth rings through in that to me. There are other things I could tell you about it, but that's something I think kind of addresses your question about various religions and how can you know. And so if they're not experiencing that, a Hindu's not experiencing that, or someone, I think they could, if they'd consider what I'm saying, they might come to the realization, hey, wait a minute, there's a thread of truth in that. How can the beings that I'm encountering actually be a maximal being if there's numerous of them and they all share authority and they don't impress upon me their perfection and this kind of thing? See what I mean?
Yeah, I do see. I come from a Christian background, so I do see the truth reflected in that depiction of God. So the idea that we enter into, and this is like a naturalistic interpretation, so it's like we enter into existence, we arise into existence, and we're faced with the infinite from which we arose, and of which we are a part. And so the essential naturalistic problem for a being that exists is, should I continue to exist, and how should I transform in the face of my environment? So it's just a question of adaptation. what do I need to learn? How do I need to change my behavior? So this idea of repentance, and if I don't, I will be punished. So if I don't learn to behave in a certain way, I will go against the way that reality operates, and so I will be punished for that. So I do think there's a deep core to the Christian tradition and that depiction of reality, or that depiction of the order of reality as this this perfect being, because it is the standard to which we adapt, right? There's this perfect being to which we must conform, to which we must surrender. And what I do like about the Christian tradition is, or at least with Jesus, is that he tries to reformulate our idea of that being, or that reality, as fundamentally forgiving. And so I think that that's true for all beings across time. I think we have the capacity to change in the face of our environment and in the face of our iniquity, in relationship to that environment. So I think it's a testament to our ability to transform, and that most things are forgivable, in that we can learn and overcome them and leave them behind us. So I do agree with you that it rings true to our experience, but I would also say we could imagine, like using a Greek god. I'm not too familiar with all the Greek gods and goddesses, but imagine who is it? Athena. Athena is the goddess of wisdom. So imagine there's a depiction of Athena that says, Athena will reward all those who study deeply and thoroughly and engage in meaningful conversation with each other, like we're doing now. Imagine that that's her prescription for humanity. In order to, I command my subjects, in order to gain wisdom, do these things. And then as a follower of Athena, or whoever, we follow those, trusting that she's trustworthy and that this is a way to go. And it actually produces the results that it promised. So it actually did make us more understanding, effect communicators, and all those things. And so I could easily see how a follower of Athena would say the same kind of arguments. So they'd be like, well, imagine, or anybody should be able to see that Athena is true, or she's a real god, because she had real effects that rang true to our experience in real life. So I think the same kind of process happens throughout all religions, where something about their god or their depiction of reality rang true, and they may be convinced that that is the only way of depicting that reality, because it confirmed itself through our actions, by following the laws of that god, or the prescription of that god. So I could see how, in the same way, a follower of Athena would say the same kind of thing. What do you think about that?
Well, I follow you, but here's the interesting thing about all these pantheons of other gods in around the world, these mythologies, is that the attributes of the holy god of the Bible are all divvied up amongst them. They're all a bunch of whacknuts who are at battle with each other all the time and fighting for authority. They start wars. They have children who fight each other. They fight for authority. One of them will say, "Do things my way," and another one gets involved and said, "No, I told the humans to do it my way." And so none of them is actually a maximal being. They're all subordinate to the grand cause, which is often very impersonal, and like chaos. The oldest versions of chaos, the Greek god chaos, which is the cause of all things, is completely impersonal. It's just the order of matter in the universe is chaos. Mm-hmm. Now, they subsequent Greek mythologies tried to personify chaos as a being, an entity, give it a personality. But the oldest ones is just the order of the universe is chaos, and from that comes, all the Greek gods, right? So there is no really maximal being in the oldest Greek mythology. So there's no absolute standard there. They're just a bunch of toga-wearing gods that argue with each other over wine and have fits about who gets to control humans all the time. Right. And we find that same thing true in the Babylonian gods, the Akkadian gods. It's true in the Slavic. It's true in the African gods. It's true in the Japanese. It's true in the and all these mythologies of the world. That's pretty much the thread that we find. An interesting thing is, if you study these mythologies, you find that a common thread in amongst many of them, not all of them, but a number in Africa in certain African tribes, in the Slavic and in the Japanese, believe it or not, in the Babylonian and Akkadian, and we find in Greek and Norse, we find that there is a son of the gods, and the gods, there's a mother of the gods and a father of the gods, and they had a son, and the son gets mad at his dad and overthrows his dad to become king of the gods. That's true in the Norse, it's true in the Greek, it's true in the Japanese, it's true in the African. Not every mythology in Africa, but there are some where that's true in there, and there is a mythology like that in Japan, and these traditions go back a couple thousand years. So we find that crazy theme. Now, why would that theme be true in various religions?
We're gonna just in a second. We'll move into Q&A. If you're able to wrap up, Neff, and then we'll give the last word to Ryan. Sorry to cut in.
Okay, sure. Well, my view is this, in a nutshell. I think that Christian theology has explanatory power to explain all phenomenon. I think atheism is incapable of explaining anything. The existence of the universe requiring a first cause that is outside of time, energy, space, and matter, the existence of human sentience, the existence of the complexity, of the mind-bending complexity and interdependence of organic life, the existence of moral thinking, and or the properties of the Hebrew scriptures. I don't think atheism has any explanatory power whatsoever, but Christian theology seems to have an answer for all of it, and that's my view.
Thanks, Neff. And then Ryan, we'd love to hear from you as well. We let Neff start, so we're definitely happy to give you some time to kind of draw together the threads of the debate on your side.
Yeah. In the same way that you were referencing the Greek god or the Greek depiction of chaos as the kind of initial, like kind of the totality, the totality of everything, or the beginning of everything, and the product of all these different gods. And then the way you said that they personify that chaos as a being, I'm convinced that, I'm interested and convinced that the God of Christianity is the same kind of story. It's an attempt to arrive at the character of total reality, or existence of the universe. So it's kind of synonymous with universe or nature, and we're all trying to divvy up and explain the same exact reality or the same truth. And so, like you said, the pantheistic conception is just a different way of divvying it up. So, like you could imagine, even in our naturalistic world, you can imagine these different forces working against each other or in constant opposition, like gravity versus thermodynamics, all these things. And you can try to depict it that way, or you could envision it as part of a whole collective system, which is the same kind of notion that they're all working actually in an order together. So I think it's just a different way of conceptualizing the same thing. So that's kind of where I'm at. But
you bet. Well, thank you very much, Ryan and Neff. And we have a lot of great questions. I think this will be a lot of fun. We'll probably go a little bit shorter than normal just because I actually forgot my charge cord. So my battery's got a little bit enough to where we can fire through some questions, but unfortunately I'm a dunce. So we'll start right away. But Ronald Mendonca, thanks so much for your super chat. And he says, please ask Nephilim Free if he agrees that natural things do exist, and that he is the one positing an additional realm, namely the supernatural.
Could you repeat that question again?
You bet.
I want to make sure I understand it.
He said, please ask Neff if he agrees that natural things do exist, and that he is the one positing an additional realm, namely like the supernatural.
Okay. Well, I don't see that. That doesn't seem to logically follow to me, because the existence of non-physical things is demonstrable. That's a fact. Human beings are capable of producing non-physical things, and I don't see how it's possible for material interactions to produce something that doesn't physically exist, but can be considered an entity in itself.
Gotcha. Thanks for that, Ronald Mendonca. We totally appreciate it, and thanks, Steph, for your answer. And Blue Kool-Aid, oh yeah, says, I like that. He says, hearing both sides will help show that the way to spread the gospel is not ramming it down someone's throat, but to be as Christ and show love. Awesome. So thanks for that super chat. We totally are encouraged to have you here, Blue Kool-Aid. Oh yeah, and and that goes for everybody as well. By the way, we always try to say, whether you be Christian, atheist, or all the different strange creatures in between, we're glad you're here. We would love for you to join the community, hit that subscribe button, get reminders of when we have future debates. We want ideological diversity. We don't want it to be an echo chamber. We want to have different people from all walks of life. So, glad you are here. And next up, Patrick Jane from Flat Earth Forums. He says, thanks for your super chat, by the way, Patrick Jane. He says, Flat Earth Forums and Theology Forums, look us up. So, thanks very much, Patrick. Your super chat means a lot. And I can say, Patrick's a terrific guy. I know Flat Earthers, they get a lot of flack. I'm not a Flat Earther myself, but we're glad to have you here if you're a Flat Earther or a Globe Earther. I don't know what the names are, but it's new to me. We've had Patrick on a debate. It was a lot of fun. So good to see you, Patrick. And then Tom, good to see you. Thanks for your question. He asks, question for Neff, if God can explain everything, does he explain anything? If you have an explanation of any data that you can gather in the future, does that not make the explanation moot?
I don't think so, because I think you might be able to make an argument for that if you're talking about something that's not eternal. But since God is eternal, it seems to me that he has the answer for all things. The physical realm is his creation, and he's master of it. So if you try to apply that to something that doesn't have, is not eternal and have all knowledge, then maybe you'd run into that problem. But since that's not God, then we don't have that problem.
Gotcha. Thanks very much for that answer, Neff. And thank you for the question, Tom. So, Z Yonder asks, for Ryan, if naturalism is true, then why does consciousness and free will exist, which gives us the ability for dominion over our instinct?
Yeah, naturalism would say, it's a product of evolution. So, I am quite stuck on, like, I have difficulty imagining the beginning where patterns of matter be like self-replicating. So, like, the idea of sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction, like, that is so bewildering. It doesn't mean it's not possible naturally, but it is something quite difficult to imagine, a matter ordering itself in a way that reproduces itself. But via natural selection, I imagine our minds have developed these systems, these ways of encountering the environment and becoming continually more adapted to the environment. So I don't know much beyond that. I think that's kind of my answer, just over time. And
Gotcha. You bet. Thanks very much. And next up, Mark Caesar. He asks, could you ask Nephilim Free whether things like Jesus' tomb never being found and the tower never being found, I think he's meaning Tower of Babylon, have anything to do with prophecies?
Not that I know of. I mean, I don't know of any prophecy that states that we would find them, for example. There is historical evidence for the Tower of Babel affair. I believe there's profoundly overwhelming evidence of that event. I don't have time to go into that, except that it relates to the etymological relationship between the names of the men in the Table of Nations in the Book of Genesis and the earliest cultures and leaders of tribes recorded in secular history. They line up. So, but I don't think prophecy tells us that we would find them, or there's some reason to believe a prophecy has failed if we haven't.
Gotcha. You bet. Thanks for that. And again, thanks for the question. These have been really fun questions. Oh, wait, hold on. I have to ask this while we are, like, really quick. Oh, and it's good to, I mean, I already know what Nephilim's opinion is because Neph is the person who brought up the argument. And I was like, some people are going to hate to hear this. That, sorry, Neph, I'm not making fun of you, but so, because a lot of you are just like, oh, Nephilim free, oh. But last night, Nephilim free was, he was deleting some comments as a moderator. And I was like, let's see. We are okay with mods doing that if it's hate speech. We've already talked about that. Or spam, like if somebody's like, whatever. But if it's vulgar language, I was kind of like, hey, Neff, like, just let it slide. Like, we don't need to police people's, like, swearing, right? We're pretty laissez-faire. Like, I try to be laissez-faire with both the live chat and the debaters, like, kind of, it's like it's your guys' show. Like everybody's in a way. So my thought is, I emailed Nephilim Free last night. I was like, hey, totally appreciate you, man, but are you okay with just letting the vulgar language slide? And Neff was like, well, and so I was, kind of siding with the chat, but he did make an interesting point that honestly you have to kind of consider. And his point was basically like, if you want to have the most diversity here, including those who, I mean, I'm putting it in my own words, but including those who are like maybe what even I would maybe call prudish. I don't swear, but hearing swearing doesn't really bother me. I just ignore it. So I was like, yeah, okay, that's an interesting point. Like, if we do want to have the most inclusive environment, and if somebody in the live chat is saying something like, hey, just imagine whatever vulgar things you sometimes see in there. It's true that there might be. It's true there might be some people that are, call them prudes if you want, but we might lose them as potential audience people, and also we might lose them in the sense of diversity. Like if we really do want full out diversity, that includes like super conservative nerds. Forgive me, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to say that if you don't swear. My personal philosophy is like if people swear, I'm like it doesn't really bother me. But it's true that some people it does bother them, and sorry for calling you kind of nerdy, but so forgive me. I was being a little bit partial there. But my point is that we do want to try to be in the same way we want to be open to having flat earthers here and globers here, Christians, atheists, whatever. It's kind of like maybe if we have what do you guys think in the live chat? Does this Lazarus says this is simple, don't let him be a mod. But I don't know if it's quite that simple though. And my only reason I say that though is I'm kind of like, well, what do you think, Ryan? I'm curious to get your opinion. I already know what Neff's is, and like I said, I kind of like Ryan
on swearing in general, or just in this like censorship,
like on whether or not like if we should try to have a culture where we say, hey, can everybody try to not. Most people don't use vulgar language. I'd say it's like 1% of the live chats happen to be something that's like bordering on vulgar. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. I say, let them speak, but it doesn't mean you have to engage with them, so I wouldn't want to try to promote a culture where you get deleted for saying certain things. But I as long as they don't have a way of swaying or controlling our scenario, we can move along as if it's not relevant. So I don't know, there's some kind of place of moderation there where you don't have to delete anything, you don't have to tell people to stop, but you can just say, hey, we're not about that, or that's not furthering the conversation in any way. So we're just not going to choose to respond if you do that, if you speak in that way. So I don't know. There's maybe some happy medium there, but
yeah, I guess my thought is if everybody in the chat most of these people, like virtually everybody in the chat doesn't swear anyway. But if you happen to be one of those, if you can help us out by not swearing to try to have people here. More people, even those that are maybe super conservative. But at the same time, one person brought up an idea in the live chat, and thanks for your ideas, Ryan. Sorry, this is very similar to what you were saying, Ryan. Basically, Puffaluffagus, thanks for your super chat. Totally appreciate it. He said he agrees with Lazarus F in the chat. He's saying type F in the chat if you agree. And there was one point where basically someone said, well, should we let that one group dictate everybody's behavior?
Yeah, that's
Because it is true that it's like, well, I mean, like, we might say we want to be tolerant of those who are offended, but at the same time, we might say, well, wait a minute, if they're tolerant of us, why can't they just hang out here even though some people, like a small percentage, swear? Like, who's really being intolerant, them or us? Like,
yeah, yeah.
My thoughts on it are kind of like this. Um, People don't consider it acceptable in a church, they don't consider it acceptable in a classroom. You wouldn't go to your boss's office probably and do it unless your boss talked like that. You wouldn't go to a job interview and do it. You wouldn't, most people wouldn't stand at the counter in the grocery store. Give me a pack of them blank in blanks. It's just not the way people typically conduct themselves, and most people will find it offensive when somebody does talk that way in a public setting. The internet is public, but there are certain people that think because it's the internet and they can be anonymous behind a screen name that's not their actual birth name, then that gives them the opportunity to use whatever language they want to, even if 12 and 13, 14-year-old kids come to these events. And I just think it's best that people learn to curb their language for the benefit of everybody coming to respect other people who may not, enjoy using that kind of language or hearing it like maybe you do. So I think out of respect for other people, people could just say, okay, I'm going to show up there, but I don't have to use that kind of language when I do it. I can voice my opinion as loudly or profoundly as I want to without that kind of language. People could do that if they wanted to.
yeah, I think so. Okay, I hear what you're saying, Neff. Said somebody in the audience said, "Get the f out, Christians." So it's like it's also in that like those cases like we want to be as inclusive as possible, and I don't know if they were kidding or serious, but I kind of like I don't like it, but I'm leaning toward just saying like we'll talk more about it. But one thing is I know that some people, well, that's let's keep going with the Q&A because I don't want to get too far off topic. Sorry about that. I had to bring it up while it was fresh on my mind because I wanted to get everybody's opinion on it. So thank you everybody in the live chat for your opinion. Thanks Puffaluffagus for your super chat. Totally appreciate that. And thank you for the debaters, both of you sharing your ideas on that. And so it's like I just kind of want to know what your guys' I really kind of want to put other people in the driver's seat, you know what I mean, rather than me being like, here's the rules. So I appreciate everybody's input, and we'll kind of go from there. So next, question and answer. Thanks for your patience, everybody. We have time for like maybe a couple more if that's okay. TomTom34B, what's up? He says, Nephilim Free seems to make retroactive statements a la, or such as, we found that, and it makes sense. And then he says, can he make future predictions with his set of beliefs, though?
Future predictions. I'm not sure what that is asking, really. I mean, does Christianity allow me to make future predictions? I guess it does because the Bible proves itself to be God's inspired word, and it makes predictions of the future. I wouldn't call them predictions. It makes emphatic statements about things that will take place in the future. It's done so many times. And so I believe we can count on the Bible for certain facts, things that will take place in the future. But as for me being able to see the future, I'm not supernatural. I have a supernaturally created spirit, but I don't have supernatural ability to know the future any better than a typical human being, I don't believe.
Gotcha. You bet. And then, let's see. Now, I'm not going to ban you, Iron Charioteer. If you could just be a little bit more friendly toward Christians by not telling them to get the F out. Okay, so we'll give you grace on that one. Let's see. And Neff, thanks for your answer. Sorry about that. just distracted sometimes. Next, another question. So, Z Yonder, I'm kind of pushing up this one in the list just because I don't want Ryan to get not as many questions as Neff. I'm trying to bring a little balance to the force. So, for Ryan, what is the necessary precondition for the existence of everything external to it?
I don't think there needs to be one. And so I was I had this discussion with Josh and Andrew, I think a couple days ago or weeks ago. But I think the natural universe for the atheist or the secularist is eternal in the same kind of sense that the Christian God is eternal. So it's trying to arrive. So in the sense that there was nothing preceding the universe, because the universe itself is the eternal thing that creates and destroys. And then the simple thing the basic thing that I refer to about this is basically conservation of matter and energy. So so like we have this cup, destroy the cup, everything that made the cup, the particles and everything still exists out there. It's just not participating in the same order. And so in that way, things don't really exist and non-exist. It's only kind of a pragmatic form that exists and doesn't exist. So I think in that way, the universe for the naturalist is eternal. But then there's the possibility that it's a simulation and all that stuff. So I don't know. I don't think there necessarily needs to be a point of origin for the universe. I think that could very well be the eternal substrate of everything. So
You bet. Thank you very much, Ryan. And any parting words from the debaters? We totally appreciate you guys. You guys are the lifeblood of modern day debate. We are honestly just appreciative of you guys sharing kind of like what you've read and thought through, and just getting in the hot seat too. So thank you guys so much. And any like final words?
I mean, thank you, James, and thank you, Evan, for the opportunity. And I'll have to any recommended books that I should read from you guys.
Signature of the Cell by Stephen Meyer.
Okay.
Yep.
Check it out.
If since you said you guys, if it does include me, there's a great book, and I feel like I can share this book because it's very balanced. It's got atheist Daniel Dennett, who's a superb, like one of the best philosophers in the English-speaking world. He is debating Alvin Plantinga, one of the best epistemologists probably in the English-speaking world. They are debating on basically philosophy of religion and science, basically whether or not science and religion contradict. It is such a cool book. I loved it. It's a short one too. It's pretty short. So anyway, it's basically their debate put in print because it was originally in person. So I can put that in a link in the description too if anybody else.
Sure. Yeah.
If anybody else thought it would be interesting, but thanks for asking. How about you? I'm kind of curious if you have a book you'd recommend.
The only kind of religion-esque books I've been interested in, there's Modern Man in Search of a Soul by Carl Jung, which is just a collection of his essays. So he talks about the pre-modern mind versus the modern mind and how those are potentially different. So that's an interesting one. And then The Rise and the Fall of the Bible. I can't remember who wrote it, but it's kind of goes through all that stuff. So those are two good ones. But
really cool. You betcha.
Yeah.
And with that, what else? I was going to say one more thing. I can't remember what it was. Maybe no, I can't remember. No, I can't at all. Okay, so thanks for. Well, I was gonna say thank you to the audience for everybody's patience during our tech issues.
Yeah.
We're honestly going to get it down. I'm telling you, we are so close to having like that sweet little intro music, and then jumping into the debate. I'm learning, I promise. So it's exciting to learn this stuff and to try to put together. I know that most of you guys are just like, I'm just here for the ideas, man, but my hope is that we can put together like kind of a styled show as well, so it has that aesthetic appeal. And for me, frankly, I just love learning that tech stuff. I just think it's so fun. So, I would remember what I was going to say now too. So in addition to saying thank you for everybody in the audience helping this channel so much with ideas and patience and everything else, want to say, forgive me, debaters. At the start of the debate, the links weren't in the description yet. Sorry about that, but they are now. So you can find both Nephilim Free's YouTube channel in the description, and then God's Fool is his alias Ryan. He has his Twitter down in the description. Ryan, if you have a YouTube, I think last time you said you don't have a YouTube channel yet. You're considering it maybe. If you have a link for that, if you've started it, let me know and I'll put it in there.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's it's been a blast tonight. I honestly enjoy this every time, so I can't thank everybody enough. It's always a blast. We hope you have a great night and keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take care, everybody.